ladies and gentlemen. We're here at Weyburn City Council in the council chambers at 5 p.m. Monday, November 27th. We want to welcome you here to our regular council meeting. And we have one council member that is not with us here tonight. He was unable, he got delayed in, so he is not here with us tonight, Mr. Mickle. But we still have a quorum and we are going ahead with our meeting here tonight. We have quite a bit of stuff on the agenda. But to start off with, we're going to look at the approval of the minutes on the regular council meeting and the strategic planning priorities meeting. Do I have someone motion?
I'll make a motion to approve those, Your Worship.
I'll second that, Your Worship.
Discussion? Call the question. All in favor? Carried. Are there any additions to the agenda?
No, Your Worship.
No? Anyone else? Then we'll move forward with our agenda. The first, there are no public hearings or notices. And the first communications is Sperling Hansen, which is delegation is with our landfill study, which will be showing up here on, I don't know if you'll be able to show it, and we'd like you to walk. Please come to the podium, please.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to come and address you on our design and operations plan and the 5-year development. So Sperling Hansen Associates is an engineering firm based in Vancouver, British Columbia, and we were asked to submit a proposal originally on the when there was an RFP out for doing the design of your landfill a couple years ago, and so we did, and I guess we're selected as the successful consultant. So subsequently we prepared a fairly comprehensive report for you, the Weyburn Landfill Design Operations and Closure Plans, and this is sort of our bread and butter work. We've been sort of preparing design operations plans for, well, gosh, about 160 landfills across Western Canada, a lot of them in British Columbia, and so we've sort of figured, I think we do probably, I like to think we do a really good job at designing landfills, so we try to incorporate that, a lot of our knowledge into your plan as well. And subsequently, we were asked to prepare sort of a 5-year fiscal plan for your facility, and so today's presentation kind of provides a big picture overview of those two reports, and so I'll get right into it. Hopefully my clicker will work this far. Great, it does. So I've got 10 things on the agenda today. First, to give you a quick synopsis of the existing conditions, and then look at development of borough areas. Landfills generally require a lot of cover material to operate in a good environmental and fashion, and make sure all the waste is properly covered and whatnot, so we'll talk a little bit about that. We always try and design landfills to give you the maximum capacity possible on the limited footprint, so I'll discuss or describe that for you. And then we look at trying to phase our landfills so that you don't build out over a large area all at once. You kind of build it one little piece at a time, and that way you can minimize your environmental impact again. And in particular, we've detailed out the filling plan for phase 1. And then I'll show you that, depending on the amount of diversion efforts that are implemented in town here, your landfill lifespan will be, I think, between 36 and 62 years as currently designed, and we'll give you the details there. And then we'll talk about progressive closure. One of the things I really believe in is to not leave your closure reliability to the very end, but to actually progressively close those surfaces of the landfill that have reached final grades, because again, you can kind of shed your clean water, and you can that way minimize the amount of leachate and environmental impacts. So I'll describe that. And then we'll look at on-site leachate collection. Right now, your landfill really doesn't have any, and that's something that I think we need to take action on improving, and I'll explain to you why that's necessary. And then we'll go into the 5-year plan and present the costs. So that's what's coming at you. I was told I've got about between 20 and 30 minutes, so I'll go fairly quickly through this, but hopefully we'll stay on schedule here. So this is a graphic of the on-site facilities, and the landfill is shown in blue here, and the various peripheral facilities and environmental controls that are in place are shown in magenta, and I won't go into the details. But what I will mention is that we did a bunch of conductivity measurements around the perimeter of the landfill. I use electrical conductivity as basically a real rough indicator of leachate impairment, and we did notice some very high conductivities. Without my glasses really focused, can't quite make the number out, but it's, I think, well over 10,000 microsiemens per centimeter, so it's a fairly elevated impact, and we've seen through other boreholes and, looking at other water quality parameters that there seems to be some development of fairly large leachate plume in the northwest corner of your landfill, and that's something, that definitely bears further investigation and taking action. So what we do find at your facility, that these contours represent not the topography, but actually represent your groundwater, the water table. And what we see basically is it's like a mound, right? There's an elevated the highest level water is right in this area. And that means that groundwater flows kind of almost radially from your landfill in most directions, but the dominant direction does seem to be in the northwest in that preferred flow path. And so I'll talk more about the impact of that groundwater flow direction later, but what we have done at your facilities, sort of, like I said, try to develop final contours for your landfill, and these are 1 meter contours, and the purple ones are every 5th meter. So we have about I don't know, 35, 40 meter high landfill facility here, and it looks kind of like a pyramid, and that's the way we generally try and design landfills. If we start out with a sort of a rectangular or square area, the most efficient means of building a landfill is to try and get it as high as possible. That way you have the thickest waste column on that footprint, and that's what we generally try and do, and we have done so again in this case. And what I also try and do is always make sure that you maintain 2 access roads in case there's a problem on one. If you were to get a landfill fire, if you were to get some kind of slump, unexpected slump, or some accident for a rollover or whatever, it's always good to have 2 points of entry and egress. And so your design incorporates basically 2 haul roads going up right to the very top of the landfill. I actually learned that the hard way, or not the hard way, but I did a project in Panama where we had a very large landfill fire burning, and the vehicles had problems, accessing the site because they just had 1 haul road. So that's an important thing to always try and do. We also have ditching, and you'll see the blue lines are basically stormwater control ditches. And our experience is that every 15 meters vertical, you want to have a berm that will collect the runoff. Otherwise, you get a lot of uncontrolled erosion, and I'm sure with a lot of people here in the farming community, you all know about the importance of, controlling erosion on your fields, and same goes for landfills as well. Actually, I got ahead of myself here. The one other thing that I mentioned, landfills do require a lot of soil, and we see that there's a resource here on the eastern portion of the landfill where we can actually excavate quite a bit more really nice sandy material here and create some additional soil cover for your landfill, and use that to potentially create additional what we call airspace. That's just capacity, landfill capacity. So for every cubic meter, of trench excavated, you can basically re-landfill that with solid waste and gain some extra airspace. That's a simple idea. So this again presents the final contours for the site in 5-phase development. And we also have presented an optional phase 6, and so you'll note that big trench that I showed you, the blue excavated out area is right here. And so we're suggesting if you were to line that properly and then landfill that, you could gain some significant additional capacity going into that extra phase 6 of your landfill. That would probably add you another 10 plus years of capacity within the landfill property. And one other feature that we have incorporated, and that's a concrete berm, that there's a fairly large stockpile of waste concrete material on site now, and more concrete is coming in. and we basically incorporate that into a berm along the southern perimeter here that allows us to go a little bit steeper on the landfill toe and then gain some additional airspace basically over the whole landfill. That extra 4 or 5 meters that we would look to elevate the berm will carry, all the way over this entire surface. So we'll again gain probably 3 or 4 years of extra capacity by building that toe berm at the front. And this is just an example of the large concrete stockpile that's in place. And you can just imagine, we would build a 1.5 to 1 or 2 to 1 slope there and utilize that really good structural material for that purpose. Now, this is what we call a cut and fill diagram, and basically it represents the cuts and the fills where the blue colors indicate areas where we need to do a little bit of shading because things are a little bit too steep already, and the red and yellows represent fill areas where we can add a whole bunch of additional waste. And I'll just kind of run up here and take a look from the back. I can't quite read the total fill. I think it's indicating, I believe, a maximum of 5 meters at the very end there. I'd have to look at my report. So definitely the figures are a lot more readable in the report. I apologize for that. I didn't realize it wasn't quite readable in the projector. But anyway, what we're seeing is, obviously the highest fills are going to be right in the middle of the cell, and then on the side slopes are going to get a little bit thinner. And one thing I do want to point out is that currently there's a high voltage power line that runs on the southern property, kind of almost bisects the property. And as we look to move or expand the landfill in this area to the south, we will need to relocate that power line. And I think some work's already been done with your staff and on looking at the options for relocating that infrastructure. Now, phase 2 here is going to go to the south and kind of develop a bit of an access ramp, and we're still staying on top of existing waste. And again, going to add 10, 15 meters of additional fill on top, and in total about 120,000 cubic meters of airspace in phase 2. I think it was roughly the same number in phase 1. And then phase 3 is going to be the bit of a biggie on the front. You'll remember it'll be right behind the berm, and that's going to gain us about 360, I think is the number at the top there, of airspace. So again, that'll be several decades of capacity. And this is where we start to impact on this old power line that runs through here right now. And so the proposal is to relocate the power line from here. And you can see the new power line relocation is drawn here in purple, coming up and then reconnecting to the existing power line right away here. So that's flagged that we would need to relocate that at that time. And lastly, phase 4, basically, again, continuing on upward and with 333,000 cubic meters. And going then upwards on phase 5. And you can see we're basically now at the top of the pyramid. And we basically completed the landfill at this point in time. And I would imagine there's roughly over 1 million cubic meters of capacity has been consumed at this point. And then you'll remember, again, we've got this excavated out area potentially that will be pretty well fully excavated by this time. All that soil will have been used in the landfill. And so there will be the capacity to proceed in and gain an additional cell, which will provide, I believe, about another 300,000 or 400,000 cubic meters of airspace optionally.
This is giving us roughly how many more years? This would take us, what are you estimating into the future?
Yeah, so I think in total it was 36 to 62 years. I've got a table, if we can park that question, I've got a table that will kind of give you a synopsis of that coming up shortly, okay? So as I mentioned, we were looking at starting to try and get all of your slopes onto a consistent 3-to-1 grade. And right now your landfill's built with fairly low slopes. They're probably 4-to-1, sometimes even 5-to-1. And so we haven't really fully utilized available airspace. And I'd really like to, real estate is, I always hate wasting it. And so what we're trying to do is, put as much solid waste on your existing footprint as possible. And so we're looking at going back back and refilling with what we call a sliver fill, those areas where we've sort of underfilled to date. And so we'd be looking at doing that and getting a bit of a wider base. And once we've got that base established, then we'd proceed to, go over a full fill plan on the north end of the landfill, which would be a little bit easier. So this sliver fill is a bit of an investment. It's kind of awkward, and operators, don't necessarily like doing it. It's not the most efficient way to landfill, but it's kind of like an investment in your foundation, right? If you build your foundation right, then you can kind of build a nice house on top without major problems. And so I'd like to sort of, encourage you to take the energy to get that landfill nicely graded, get those slopes properly closed off. And then, you'll be in really good shape to kind of run a nice systematic landfill on top. And so this is the table that basically shows the lifespan, and what we've done is looked at two diversion scenarios. That's the 11% diversion scenario, and here's a 40% diversion scenario. Those are, I think, both achievable. The 11% is, if you probably just sort of encourage people to look at diverting pop bottles and their newspaper and whatnot, and the 40%, you'd really have to go full on and try and encourage them, to divert their organics, put in a composting operation, and be a lot more aggressive on trying to keep as much as possible out of the landfill. A lot of municipalities in British Columbia are achieving, 50, 60, even as much as 70% diversion. So it is doable, but it does take a lot of effort and, possible investment as well, both in infrastructure and the extra cost to divert materials. So that'll be, I think, a decision for a council to make in the future. But I'm sort of giving you the range of, your landfill can last, up to as low as 36 years and potentially as high as 62. Now, you were asking, Your Worship, about Phase 6, and you can see here, so if we go to Phase 6, we'll either have, with the 11% diversion, we were projecting 36 years to Phase 5, and then an extra, 13 years to give you in Phase 6, and with recycling, we could do even better. That would give you another, 24 years, if my math is right off the top of my head, or no. And
composting by doing grass clippings, keeping grass clippings out of there too, that also adds a lot to
Absolutely. Like grass clippings, organics, leaves are another, big sort of waste stream that can be easily composted with minimal environmental problems.
And extend another 5-10 years on that.
Yeah. But there's lots of other stuff that just grass clippings won't alone do it, right?
There's lots of other stuff.
Okay, so there's the range and of your capacity, and sort of shows how each phase would roughly give you, somewhere around 10 years per phase of landfill development. Okay, so as I mentioned, what we do like to do is encourage you to, again, do progressive closure, and that's why we kind of focused on Phase 1 on the north side. I also understand that, there's some development happening in that area, and I think there's an interest to kind of green up that interface so that the landfill isn't so in your face with operations and noise. And by basically getting this north face fill done first, you'll be able to, do closure on that. Ideally, do some nice reclamation, so plant some trees, and essentially get it all greened up so that then you'll be working behind a berm, and really the landfill should not be very intrusive on the community at all from that point moving forward. So that was kind of the part of the plan. And then we were looking at moving on to Phase 2 and 3, 4, 5, and lastly, Phase 6 would be at the very side here, optionally. You can see here we kind of present the excavation contours for that borrow pit, and then obviously it would be filled up subsequently. Now, I mentioned progressive closure, but I didn't give you the details. Landfill closure now is a fairly high-tech sort of thing. You don't just, dump a bunch of dirt over your garbage and call it the end of the day. What we find, landfills basically do two things. Well, three things. They produce leachate, they produce landfill gas, and also you want to isolate the refuse. So in order to achieve all of those things, typically we do a engineered cover system that will have what's called a barrier layer. That's the main layer that prevents leakage into the landfill, and typically it's either made out of clay or it uses a geomembrane, and a geomembrane is basically a fairly thick piece of plastic. It's like a really super heavy-duty tarp that generally has a lifespan of 100+ years, and so you're probably all familiar with different types of geomembranes, but typically in landfills, the materials that are used are polyethylene, high-density polyethylene, or linear low-density polyethylene. It's actually the preferred liner system is what's called LLDPE. And so here at Weyburn, you do have a lot of clay available, and so in the general area with the glacial till and deposits, so we sort of felt that it would probably make the most sense to continue using the natural resources and build your cap with clay, which would be the kind of this tan layer. You can see it's typically about 500 or 600 millimeters thick, and then on top of that, what we find is if you put down a clay layer, it doesn't let the water penetrate, so it will pond on surface. And so if you don't provide drainage, especially on the side slopes, you can get saturation of your topsoil and failure. So it's really important, when we build our covers, to also add a gravel drainage layer on top of the clay so that the topsoil don't get saturated and slump off. Okay, and the same principles are true as well for a geomembrane cap. So, and on top of those topsoil, of course, we look to seed. Most landfills will use a grass-type cover system, plants or native grasses, but there are other options where you can thicken up the cap and maybe even plant trees. So that sort of depend on your preference for end use. Okay, now I mentioned leachate, and what we see is basically the landfill right now collects a fair amount of leachate kind of just in a wetland area, and then it flows into the creeks, and that's not a really good thing to be doing. And also we're seeing leachate moving in the groundwater to the northwest. And so what I believe is the right thing to do is to collect all your leachate, get it into an on-site treatment pond, and from there basically pump it to your sewage treatment lagoon where it can be properly treated along with your wastewater. Okay, so that's sort of the capital upgrade project we recommend. It's always, in our experience, way more efficient and cost-effective to commingle your leachate effluent with wastewater and use existing infrastructure than to try and build a dedicated facility just for treating leachate. Because one of the things we find is that leachate is typically quite a bit stronger than wastewater, and so when you mix the two things together, that you get a lot of dilution right off the bat, and that makes it easier to treat the effluent. So we're seeing that as the right approach, and adding possibly some additional aerators in your lagoon to do the good treatment. Okay, on-site, how would we collect it? Basically, the strategy would be primarily to put in perimeter leachate collectors along the toe of the landfill. They'd have to be dug down deep enough to get down to the clay, and basically try and intercept as much as possible. And certainly in the future, if we went to phase 6 there, we'd be looking at doing a liner in this area, and then a leachate collection system network, so we capture 100% of leachate in this area. And so that the actual detailed design of that infrastructure, of course, would have to happen in the future, and make a determination of the depth of these collectors, how deep they would have to go in order to be fully efficient. Okay, we're looking at then conveying all the leachate that is collected by gravity, for the most part, with a pump station on the back of the landfill here as well, into a leachate pond where the leachate could potentially be aerated or basically just stored on site and then pumped through a pump station and a force main to your existing wastewater treatment plant. With phase 6, if we moved in that direction, then this would be 40, 50 years down the road, probably long after we're all retired. And there'd be basically the construction of, the collection system here and a pump station, again, all that leachate being conveyed hopefully to the wastewater treatment plant, and also, or directly to the leachate pond, and from there to the wastewater treatment plants. So that would be a detailed design decision again. And that just shows the pump station that would need to be installed. And so this is just a synopsis of all of the capital projects that we see being done, starting with a detailed filling plan for your phase one regrading operations, and then basically looking at relocating the site entrance and scale. I should mention that your current access to the landfill, you'll notice, kind of problematic, right? Like you're in a very what's the word, constrained or fairly tight intersection with multiple streets all merging. So it's sort of somewhat dangerous the way it's set up right now. And we'd like to see that entrance move further uphill. And so there's opportunity for queue and, just a lot less opportunity for collisions. And then looking at relocating the existing scale, because it's sort of located on a very steep escarpment, and again, there's no opportunity to queue vehicles without having them stop on a fairly steep hill, which can be, I'm sure, problematic in the wintertime. Now, all the infrastructure upgrades that we're sort of outlining in this 5-year plan do cost a fair chunk of change, and so one of the things that I think will be necessary to review the budgets and make a commitment if you're going to want to install all this infrastructure, that there will be a need to pay for it, and we typically believe the right way to do it is through tipping fees, but again, that's something that is really up to you guys to determine what the public would prefer. But I can't tell you that, things to do, things properly protect the environment does require some spending, and unfortunately, that'll require some escalation of the cost of service. Now, one of the things we're recommending is adding sort of recycling infrastructure in the form of U-bays for recycling, and also a Z-wall for residential drop-off area. When I was last on site, it was kind of almost edge of winter. There was a lot of rain. Trucks were driving up in mud to the active face, right? And what we see most landfills doing now is instead building a residential Z-wall drop-off area. So what you do is you just build a lock block sort of zigzag Z-wall and put a bunch of roll-off bins and usually pave that area, right? So the public just drives in, backs up, chucks their garbage into the roll-off bin, and they never have to go to the landfill active face, get muddy or stuck, right? It's a lot safer. And so most landfills that I have the pleasure to work on, have ultimately gone in that direction. And so we recommend doing that for sure. And then also looking at trying to divert your wood waste and yard and garden waste through a composting operation. The oil recycling facility, looking at it, I think is one facility that really does need an upgrade as well. There's like oil, kind of pooling in the building, and I think that the working conditions that those people are working in are not the best. Like there's lots of smells of hydrocarbons in that area, and there's one facility that I thought really, you should revisit, because it probably does not have the best standards in place. One of the ways of diverting your wood waste, I believe, efficiently is through burning. Okay, if you can separate out your clean wood waste and basically burn it off instead of landfill, I strongly encourage you to do that. And the big reason is that when you landfill your wood waste, it basically decomposes and produces methane. And methane is a really potent greenhouse gas that's, in fact, like 200 times as bad as carbon dioxide. And so, if you're burning off the wood waste, you're essentially slowing down global warming by a factor of 200 initially. Over time, that global warming potential drops down to 20 over a 100-year period, but that rate of decline is really slow. So we always encourage people to either compost their wood waste or burn it off. Okay. And then we're looking at managing stockpiles, managing broken concrete on site, putting in the perimeter leachate collection system that I described, doing a little bit of a better job on managing your hydrovac disposal area, which is right now a bit of a back to the edge of the bank and dump it over the edge. And then, of course, setting up your composting pad to allow you to divert the yard, grass clippings, and wood waste. And lastly, starting up the progressive closure of phase one, which is going to be finished within the next 5 years. So we did a very detailed 5-year plan, and I won't dig through every number here. Again, it's kind of hard to see, but what I will say is here's a summary of the 2017-2018 capital works. And like I said, one of the first things, you really need to roll up your sleeves and figure out, how are we going to pay for this? Can we afford it? And if so, how are we going to pay for it? And so we're looking at helping you a little bit, but I think the bulk of this would be, your staff and council basically making some tough decisions based on the costs that are projected. And then we look at spending about $250,000 on regrading the east and west slopes for the progressive closure. And then getting into upgrading your entrance facilities, making that entry safer, putting in a new scale with inbound and outbound lanes, about a $500,000 project, putting in the residential Z-wall, as I mentioned, a lot safer. The public generally really likes it because they don't get flat tires, they don't get stuck, and supporting that with a roll-off truck, and then a bunch of little cleanup projects. So about $1.5 million was projected in spending for 2018. And then this was just assessment of the break-even tipping fee that we figured for the landfill works out to about $80 per ton for your solid waste system. And currently, I believe your tipping fee in 2013 was $46. And I'm not sure if this was sort of our recommended escalation of the tip fees going up would be one way to pay for the infrastructure. So, and similar escalations in, the other services, whether it's a trailer being tipped or whatever, but those are sort of the ranges of numbers, and you may consider that number very high. I'm sure a lot of the public would, but we found in British Columbia that our tipping fees are generally running in that range of $80 to $100 a ton. That's just what it seems to be, to run a proper modern landfill facility and solid waste system. So that's sort of where we're at right now. But obviously, you need to do a lot more study in the best way to look at prioritizing and how to roll that service fee recovery out. Now, as I mentioned, the first thing is to build your foundation, and this is basically the grading plan that we saw working in this Northwest area, and again, a roughly $250,000 budget. And then in 2018, we had a bunch of projects dialed up. And basically, they were primarily the road relocation to an entry point here, the scale facility, the concrete lock blocks, and I've got to click through. I think a total budget, as I mentioned, about roughly $1.5 million. This is an example of a typical scale. This one we just built last summer at Thornhill Transfer Station. And a lot of the stuff is modular, comes on site and is just erected, and allows you to basically, do a very efficient job. You can add automation. This is one way that you can reduce your operating costs, is to, reduce the hours of operation of the facility where you need a scale attendant, and then just give your haul trucks, your commercial guys a card, and they can swipe themselves in and have 16 hours a day access unrestricted, and yet you can really limit the hours of operation of the landfill. This is just an example of the kiosk. The picture's a little bit dark, but this is sort of the lady here scanning her card, and the booth itself sits fairly high because it's designed primarily for heavy, big garbage trucks. But like I said, the automation allows you to do some things that'll save on operating costs, which are usually the biggest factor in landfills. Now, this picture just shows some of the U-bays. These will contain tires, scrap metal, white goods like refrigerators and stoves, and things like that. This is, again, the Thornhill landfill we just completed building. And in the foreground here is the Z-wall. You can see the different roll-off bins. And the technology on these is really cool now that you have a very simple cranking system that allows these bins to close after hours so that birds don't get into the garbage, and so that you can shed snow very easily and don't make leachate in your bins. And so 2019, we were looking at mainly leachate infrastructure upgrades, and that's basically building the leachate collectors around the perimeter and the leachate pond. And I think the bulk of the work in 2019 was doing the engineering up front for that. And we were estimating upwards of $500,000 in engineering fees and designing the system. and doing all the drilling and things that would be necessary for figuring out how it's going to work, as well as the, assessing your existing wastewater treatment plant and the conveyance system to the facility. Also some work on the soil relocation pad. And as I mentioned, budget for 2019, roughly $253,000. I'm sorry, I said $500,000. I believe I meant $250,000 there. And then the 2020 projects, this is basically where the cost would be incurred, building the leachate collector, estimated about $400,000, doing some ditching upgrades, upgrading a leachate treatment pond at the landfill. This would involve a fully lined pond with a geomembrane liner and aeration system, so it's not an inexpensive piece of infrastructure. And adding engineered wetland for stormwater management, upgrading your hydrovac disposal area, which is, like I said, right now a little bit uncontrolled, and then putting in the composting pad. And so again, in 2020, $2.5 million capital expenditures projected, and I think that's getting close to the end of the 5-year plan. This just shows them, again, the map where some of the key infrastructure was identified, which included the leachate pond, the pump station, and the perimeter stormwater and leachate collection system around the landfill. And again, summarizing the budget, $2.5 million there. Getting out to 21, I think most of our work is completed. We're now going to be starting to think about the progressive closure of phase 1. And that's, again, detailed engineering design for the cap, estimated about $239,000. Usually engineering runs about 10 to 15% of the capital works. And then looking at doing the actual phase 1 closure out in 2022 right now is when we think we're going to reach final grades here. And that would include putting the cap on. And so that'd be roughly a $1.2 million project in 2022. And so this graphic just shows the total projected capital costs on all of your infrastructure, and we're projecting about $3.3 million in engineering structures, stormwater management, environmental monitoring, and the Revelstoke Iron Grizzly is an alternate daily cover system, which we recommend you look at investing in because it can pay for itself literally within about a few months and allows you to not place so much soil in your landfill. And then if we were to add phase 6, there would be some lining costs incurred as well. So the cost of the landfill expansion would go up to about $4.9 million, but the landfill would last, another 15, 20 years, as we saw earlier. And operating costs are always the big part of landfill operations. They're usually 60 to 70% of overall costs. And right now, your landfill's projected to cost about $740,000 annually. This is just an estimate of basically the landfill operations and administration, about $400,000. And operations and maintenance about $229,000. This is based on your past budgets. Environmental monitoring, $12,000. Annual reporting, $25,000. And operating contingency, roughly about 10%. So that adds up to, like I said, close to $750,000 a year. And estimated operating costs right now are anywhere from about $40 at current tonnages to I think about $76 if you achieve the 40% diversion. And one of the things that does happen is that landfill operations are pretty well fixed. You have to run your compactor, you have to have your scale attendant. And so as you decrease the tonnage, one of the things that does happen is that on a per ton basis, unfortunately, the cost of the landfill operation go up as well on a per ton basis, but generally they stay pretty well, at $740,000 or a little bit less, because you're just doing a lower tonnage. But on a per ton basis, the costs do tend to appear to go up. Now, last thing I want to wrap up on is closure costs. And so again, we estimated the closures for a different waste generation scenario, as well as a number of different closure options. And this table summarizes the results. And what we're seeing is basically your progressive closures, depending on the areas, are going to run from $1 million, $500,000, $500,000, $1.5 million, and $1 million. So about $4.5 million in closure up to phase 5, and another $1.5 million to close phase 6. On a per square meter basis, these closure costs are actually coming in quite reasonable. A lot of our projects, we're seeing closure costs upwards of $80 a square meter. Here we're projecting costs about $36 to $51 per square meter, and that's because you have a lot of your construction materials available on site, like the good sand, the clay available locally, and so we're seeing, costs lower than what we generally experience in British Columbia. So with that, we developed a very detailed lifespan budget or cash flow analysis for your facility, and we're seeing your operating costs run roughly around $80 per ton. And as I mentioned, in order to pay for that, you kind of need to get your tipping fee in that same area of $80, $85 per ton over the next 3 or 4 years to be able to basically pay for all the infrastructure upgrades. And I think the last thing is post-closure costs, though those are relatively modest on a per-year basis, around $100,000 a year, $120,000 a year. But, they go in, year out. And post-closure, you usually have to maintain landfills about 25 to 30 years post-closure. So they do add overall costs to the system, about $1 a square meter over the life of landfill. So right now, your current post-closure reserve is about $235,000 per year needs to be set aside. And we've included that in the break-even analysis of your tip fee. And so the money's there, as long as we establish that tip fee around that $85 a ton number. And so that is my presentation. I hope I didn't take too long. I apologize if I did, but you've pretty well got the full synopsis of anything. And I don't know if hopefully there's time for questions. I'm sure you probably have some.
Is there any questions, gentlemen? Mel?
Yes, thank you for that thorough explanation. The tipping fee, that covers operational and capital costs?
Correct.
But it doesn't cover inflation?
Basically, that's break even at current dollars, and you need to work with your accountants. Like, the challenges with interest rates are really a bit of analysis in themselves, and depending on what assumptions you make, the results can be quite different. Like, so it sort of depends on the money that you put aside and the interest you gain on it versus the inflation rates that are incurred, right? So we sort of cost everything in today's dollars, and then you need to make those adjustments.
We have to allow for inflation going forward as we adjust our tipping fees.
For sure.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, good question. Thank you.
Is there any other questions, gentlemen? Well, with that, we thank you very much for your time and your coming out here and the good study that you've done. This gives us a lot of information to think about, and it gives us a good plan to go forward to ensure that we are going to have a 36 to 62 year process out there. We're going to strive to make sure we keep recycling so we can hit that closer to that 62 year rather than 36 year. And that's what our council has been working towards here.
Great.
So,
well,
again, thank you for your time and coming out.
My pleasure. Yeah, good luck with it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So with that, we move on to our communication, waiver and bills.
Your Worship, this item is just for information. I know that we've been dealing with, we've been having discussions with respect to incentive programs, and in terms of just basically making sure that all the councillors have this information. We wanted to make you aware that this program is currently in place, that there are dollars that are budgeted for that every year. And as we get closer to reviewing some of this information to see where we want to go forward or any types of adjustments we can make, this is in place. But this is particularly germane to any discussion of redevelopment in the older areas of the city. And this is a program that we already have in place, which provides some incentives. Just from my preliminary look at it, I'm not sure whether it accrues to developers or to householders or both, but that's something certainly when we get into those discussions that we can. This is one touch point of a program that we do have in place, and we can probably do some analysis on it and provide some information in terms of since the program started, what's been the uptake and the results as a measure to see where we want to go in the future.
Any discussion? Mr. Van Betju?
Yes, thank you, City Manager Roy. Yeah, it was quite interesting. A resident spoke to me about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and they got an envelope in the mail, and they thought, oh my goodness, I got another bill from the city. What is this for? And they opened it up, and lo and behold, there was a check there for $1,000. And this came from the Weyburn Builds program. Their contractor had applied for it for them, so there was unknowns to them, but it was quite a nice surprise. And I believe it's based on a percentage of your building permit. So you have to apply for a building permit to get this. It has to be over a certain dollar value, and then you get a percentage back from the city. So I encourage all residents to take a look at this program. It's found money, and certainly encouraging people to renovate their homes in Weyburn.
Mr. Richards?
Thanks, Your Worship. So I agree with Councillor Van Betju. How is this available on the city's website? Could someone go on there and find details about this?
I don't think it's on there yet. I'm not taking that information, but if it's not, I can put it up.
We can make it available?
Yep.
That'd be excellent, thank you. And I would appreciate some analysis of how well it's been received over the last
I think
5 years.
as we start looking at it
Yeah.
in terms of is this working for us? Is it doing the right, getting the types of response that we want? Yeah, we would take a look and do a bit of a synopsis for council.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other comments? I think that's one of the things that we, again, are striving to do here at Council and through our communication office, that we make sure that people are fully aware of the type of programs that the city is running and where to get a hold of the information and how to get a hold and make sure that everything is available and we can progress our city forward. The next communication is a postponed public hearing. Mr. Hardy?
Through your worship, the report indicates that as we started looking and having some discussions with respect to the bylaw, making a public hearing, we found that we got ourselves in a bit of a state because we had a couple of extra questions come back from council which delayed us. So in effect, what we're looking at is we are looking at the development levy bylaw, the public meeting being held on December the 11th. And this just basically provides council with the information related to that delay and why it's occurring.
So our open public meeting for on the levy will be December 11th. Where at?
Here in council chambers, your worship.
Okay. Very good. Moving forward, we're going on to reports to council. We'll do the environmental committee. Report, environmental committee. Mr. Van Betju?
Thank you, Your Worship. On Friday, November 17th.
Mel, your mic.
On Friday, November 17th, the regular meeting of the Environmental Resource Committee was held. First item on the agenda was curbside recycling numbers. The committee reviewed the curbside recycling reports for the past few months. In August, there was 23,540 kilograms collected. In September, 22,480 kilograms, and in October, 22,870 kilograms. Numbers were very consistent and show that on average over 3,000 carts are being picked up monthly. The committee is happy with these numbers and will continue to promote and encourage recycling to citizens of Weyburn to hope that these numbers rise. The 2017 Household Hazardous Waste Day was held, and the tentative for 2018 is June 3rd. The 2017 Waste Day was very successful. The city sent approximately $27,000 worth of hazardous waste materials to be recycled. On the same day, Sarcan collected 190 gallons and 40 liters of reusable paint and approximately 600 gallons of unusable paint. They also collected 1 full pallet of TVs and monitors that were stacked and wrapped. Sarcan would like the public to know that they collect paint all year long, just not on the hazard, just not once a year, so that everybody knows that they can bring it to Sarcan any day of the year. Fluorescent light bulb recycling bin was suggested by a resident and is being looked into. Proper storage and disposal of these bulbs is very important as they contain mercury. The committee would like to explore the idea of having an indoor recycling bin at one of our facilities where citizens can bring the bulbs for proper disposal by staff at Household Hazardous Waste Day. Recycling cart requirements. Staff have received inquiries from residents wishing to opt out of the program or share a cart with a neighbor. Each cart is tied to the property, much like the refuse bins are, and therefore must remain at that site. Citizens may choose not to use the bin, however, the monthly fee will still be applied to their utility bill. The committee will continue to encourage recycling and educate the public on the impact recycling has on our landfill and on our community. Bi-weekly garbage pickup. The City of Weyburn is looking at moving to bi-weekly refuse pickup in the winter months. With the curbside recycling program now in place, refuse loads have lessened for the average household. Bi-weekly pickups would occur during the winter months only, with an exception during the Christmas season, at which time the pickups will be weekly as usual. The Environmental Committee recommends that the City of Weyburn move forward with the bi-weekly refuge pickup during the winter months. Water conservation was discussed. Staff will undertake a public awareness campaign on water conservation. An insert with helpful in-home conservation tips will go out in an upcoming water bill. This information will also be available to citizens through our website and social media. At the last council meeting, the landfill operations study was accepted and the landfill 5-year plan was adopted. The committee reviewed the summary of the detailed 5-year plan and have been invited to open council on November 25th at 5 p.m. for a presentation by Sperling Hansen on the key objectives of the detailed plan. The meeting was adjourned. And I would like to thank, we had a couple members from the Environmental Committee that did come to the meeting tonight to listen to the presentation. I'd like to thank them for coming.
Mr. Richard?
Thanks, Your Worship. Councillor Van Betje, thanks so much for this report and all the work the Environment Committee has done. I'm going to ask a question that I probably should have asked you in advance, because I know you might not be able to answer it, but does our service provider feel like, so at 3,000 carts getting picked up and that tonnage that's getting picked up, is that in line with what they expected? Is it more than they thought or less than they thought? And maybe they haven't given you that answer yet either.
They haven't given us that answer. I haven't asked them. We'll run that question by them. They would probably be able to compare it to, they do the pickup in Estevan, so they would probably use that as a comparable, but we'll certainly look into that.
Thanks.
Mr. Chesson? No? The other question that I have for you, Mr. Van Betje, is there a campaign being done to our commercial people, as we saw in the last refuge one, that our landfill is only made up by 11% of residential, and so a vast majority, almost 89% of the landfill is being filled by commercial. Are we getting our commercial people within the city into this recycling program?
We haven't proceeded to the commercial end yet. We've concentrated the last couple of months on getting the providers to go out to the multifamily units to get them on the program so that they were all recycling. That'd be the apartments and the condominiums. Anything larger than a fourplex was not receiving city recycling services. So the emphasis has been to get those units on the recycling program, and then we'll follow up with the commercial end.
Very good. We will make that note that Environmental Committee report has been received and filed. Moving on, there's no consent agenda. motions. We start off with this one. Mr. Chessel, you have to excuse yourselves. Accounts payable with a pecuniary interest. Go ahead.
Your Worship, I'd like to make a motion that the purchase is dated November 20th, 2017, in the amount of $4,307.67, where pecuniary interest has been disclosed, be passed for payment.
Second that, Your Worship.
Discussion? With that, call the question. All in favor? Carried. Yep. That's where we did that. Okay, right. Our next accounts payable. Mr. Van Betju.
Your Worship, that the purchases in the amount of $399,212.99 from November 8th to November 23rd, 2017 be passed for payment.
Second.
Your Worship, I'll second that motion.
Discussion? Call the question. All in favor? Carried. Water treatment chemical tender award.
On October 3rd, 2017, the City of Weyburn Water Treatment Plant Chemical Supply Tender for 2018 was posted on SAS Tenders. Invitational letters and the request for quotation were also provided directly to 7 chemical suppliers. The chemicals obtained through the competitive bid process will be utilized in water treatment processes in 2018 under an annual contract. Quotations were to be received by the City of Weyburn by November 14th, 2017 at 2 p.m. A total of 10 tenders were received, 3 of which could not be considered due to late submissions. The results of the tenders are listed in your report. And it should be noted that the prices submitted by Univar Canada are provided in Canadian dollars, but will fluctuate based on US dollar exchange rates. And it is recommended that the following 2018 chemical supply quotations be accepted. Univar Canada quotation for potassium permanganate at $4.84 per kilogram. Brentag Canada quotation for chlorine gas at 98.47 cents per kilogram. Border Chemical Supply Company quotation for liquid aluminum sulfate at $0.316 per kilogram. Control Chem Canada quotation for hydrofluorosilicic acid at $1.12 per kilogram. Univar Canada quotation for sodium nitrate at $1.53 per kilogram. Univar Canada quotation for sodium hydroxide solution at 79 cents per kilogram. And Univar Canada quotation for Superflock C496 at $5.39 per kilogram.
Your Worship, I'm most pleased to make this motion that Councillor Bailey generally likes to make. Tonight, I'll do it. We'll see how it goes. I would like to motion that Council accept the following quotations for the 2018 chemical supply for the water treatment plant. First, from Univar Canada Limited for potassium permanganate in the amount of $4.84 per kilogram. From Brentag Canada Inc. chlorine gas for the amount of 98.47 cents per kilogram. From Border Chemical Company liquid aluminum sulfate in the amount of 0.316 per kilogram. Control Chem Canada Limited hydrofluorosilicic acid in the amount of $1.12 a kilogram. Univar Canada sodium nitrate in the amount of $1.53 per kilogram. Univar Canada sodium hydroxide 50% solution in the amount of 79 cents per kilogram. And finally, from Univar Canada Limited Superflock C496 in the amount of $5.39 per kilogram.
I would like to second that, Your Worship.
That was very well done. Did you ever consider a career in radio? Or
No, never.
Do we have any more discussion?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. These are done on a yearly basis, as I'm thinking we just said. Would we be getting chances of getting a better price if we went for a 2-year or 3-year tender?
It's my understanding that these prices don't fluctuate a lot from year to year. So I think we're getting similar prices to what we saw last year.
Okay, thank you. I just thought it'd be easier and Councillor Richards wouldn't have to read them so often.
But again, our vendors are doing a year-to-year basis. It works.
Totally understand.
Any other discussion? Call the question. All in favor? Carried unanimously. We go on to the city debt limit. Laura, go ahead.
So the City of Weyburn has a debt limit that was established in 2014, and it's actually been carried over for quite a few years. Through the local government committee, we haven't had to use it, but we just want to extend it going forward. We haven't used it for many years.
Should we raise it in anticipation just in case to 20,000?
No, I was going to, but you have to give a reason why you want to raise it. So we don't really have any reason to raise it at this time, so.
I just thought due to inflation and et cetera.
But if we don't have
Basically,
a
just-
project that we're going to use it for, I don't think they'll probably approve it.
So this has to go through the government and the government
Yeah.
has to approve it. So.
Goes through the SMB, so they will, they review it every 3 years.
Any other discussion? And the debt limit is at?
$16,300,000.
With that, Your Worship, I'd like to make a motion that pursuant to Section 133 of the City Act, City Administration be authorized to request the Saskatchewan Municipal Board to maintain the debt limit to the City of Weyburn at $16,300,000 as was approved in 2014.
I'll second that, Your Worship.
Okay, point of clarification just before we call for the vote. That doesn't mean that the City of Weyburn is in debt at that point. We are not in debt, but that just means that if we had to have a project, we could borrow that money up to $16,300,000 to that point. And then if we had to go farther, we'd have to request to go farther into it, as opposed to what a few other cities are sitting at here right now.
That's where Your Worship is considered a large credit card in my world.
A red large credit card, yes. Platinum one. So, all in favor? Carried unanimously. Landfill gate attendant contract. Mr. Hardy?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Through you to the members of council and the public. The current contract for a landfill gate attendant is due to expire at the end of this year. And the Public Works Department issued a request for proposals seeking qualified and competitive bids to provide gate attendant and associated services for a 3-year term from 2018 through to December of 2020. The key elements of this contracted position was to provide a high level of service to landfill customers, to operate the landfill gate in accordance with the policies, procedures of the city, ensuring that there's the appropriate assessment and collection of fees, inspection of incoming loads, and basically monitoring the oil filter collection facility. The RFP closed on Monday, November the 13th. 5 proposals were received. There was one which was after the closing date and was disqualified and that was not opened. In looking at in reviewing the information, each of the respondents was carefully reviewed, and as a result of the analysis of the staff in looking at the responsibilities and any added items that were being put forward by respondents, the recommendation of the staff is recommended to be the Commissioners' organization, particularly because there's a large pool of replacement employees in the event of unanticipated expenses. They're used to working to a new set of rules and working with rules and do a lot of their own internal inspections and quality control on top of what the city may do. And we feel, and staff feel confident that with the awarding of this contract to the commissioners, we are going to be able to move in a new direction. And we want to ensure that we've got a contractor that has the best understanding and ability to take the work as it's defined today and as it will be as a result of some of the changes that we're going to make in the landfill operations over the next number of years.
Mr. Bailey?
In saying that, Your Worship, I'd like to make a motion that the bid of Commissioner South Saskatchewan to provide landfill gate attendant service for a 3-year term commencing January 2nd, 2018 to December 31st, 2020 be accepted.
Seconder?
I'll second that motion, Your Worship.
Discussion?
Thanks, Your Worship. Just a few questions, and I don't know if it's to the city manager or to whom, but I think that's where I'm going to direct them. I wonder, as I looked at this, I wonder how we went about this process, and here's what I'm asking. Was there a particular set of concerns with our current provider that we weren't hearing about? Like, we're hearing a lot about what that the commissioners might understand, the rules, or at least I get that, but is our current provider not meeting some concerns that we might have? I don't see this as about money, I guess is what I'm saying, is a negligible difference in cost here from the two bids that are sort of the top two bids, I would say. So I'm wondering, you know, if we took the time to have an interview with one of the submissions, did we do that with the other one so that we were making sure that if there were concerns going unaddressed, that somebody had an opportunity to address them?
Your Worship, to address this question, I would ask that we go into closed session.
Okay, at this point in time, we'll go into closed session. For those at home, we will close the doors. We'll have to ask all people in the audience to stop for a minute. We're going to go into closed session for a few minutes, approximately 10 minutes, and we return. Can I have a motion to come back in camera, please?
I'll make that motion, Your Worship.
I'll second that, Your Worship.
All in favor? Carried. With this, we will take up.
Motion on the floor.
We have a motion on the floor to accept the commissioner's vote. Any more discussion? Call the question. All in favor? All opposed? Carried with a recorded vote of 3-2, 3-4, 2 against. Right? 4-2. Yeah, 4. I wasn't missing myself. 4-2 on that. Do you want to record who's descending?
Your Worship, we actually, point of order, we cannot record votes, or we can't do recorded unless it's asked of before we vote.
Okay.
After we vote, we can no longer do that. Okay.
At that point, we'll move forward, but it is carried at a 4-2 for the commissioners. Introduction of bylaws. Bylaw 2017-3368, extended supplementary role. Go ahead. Mr. Hardy.
Through you, Your Worship, this bylaw didn't quite work. Worship, we need to, in order to process our assessment roll, the supplementary assessment roll, we need to extend the time required for its completion, and therefore we are asking that the roll be extended from the the preparation of the roll be extended from December 1st, 2017 to January 31st, 2018.
Motion?
Your Worship, I'll make a motion that bylaw 2017-3368 to extend the time required for the completion of the 2000 supplementary assessment roll from December 1, 2017 to January 31st, 2018 be read the first time.
I'll second that, Your Worship.
Discussion? All in favor? Carried.
Your Worship, I'll move that bylaw 2017-3368 to extend the time required for the completion of the 2017 supplementary assessment roll from December 1, 2017 to January 31st, 2018 be read a second time.
I'll second that, Your Worship.
Call the question. All in favor? Carried unanimously.
Your Worship, I'll move that bylaw 2017-3368 to extend the time required for the completion of the 2017 supplementary assessment roll from December 1, 2017 to January 31st, 2018 be given 3 readings at this meeting.
Second.
I'll second that, Your Worship.
Call the question. All in favor? Carried unanimously.
Your Worship, I'll move that bylaw 2017-3368 to extend the time required for the completion of the 2017 supplementary assessment roll from December 1, 2017 to January 31st, 2018 be read a third time and passed.
I'll second that, Your Worship.
Call the question. All in favor? Carried unanimously. Bylaw is passed. We now move to bylaw 2017-3369, which is referred to as the snowmobile bylaw. Mr. Hardy? Or just before we do, Mr. Cheslow's going to excuse himself from this vote as a conflict of interest. Mr. Hardy?
Thank you, Your Worship. The bylaw which is being placed before before council is a result of discussions which have been had amongst a number of stakeholders, including the local snowmobilers organizations, the city police, and staff, and the bylaw which is before you identifies those areas within the city limits under which snowmobiles will be permitted, including some potential load points where there would be an ability for arrangements to be made for the proper detrailering of snowmobiles. So this notes, of course, that snowmobiles are not permitted on private property, and therefore the city has no ability to regulate in those cases. But in terms of the areas which have been identified as city right-of-ways or city properties, the city is concurrent with these routes to be approved and or used as the case may be in one of the load points.
In hearing that, Your Worship, I'd like to move that the bylaw 2017-3369 to be known as the City of Weyburn Snowmobile Bylaw, providing regulations and access for snowmobile operations in the city limits, be read the first time.
Your Worship, I'll second that motion. Discussion? Mr. Bailey?
Thank you, Your Worship. I think if, just for the public's knowledge, we've been working with the Saskatchewan Snowmobile Association dealing with insurance issues, our city police and council of the days, to ensure that they do have access for food, fuel, and other things, and not totally limiting them. That doesn't give permission to run up and down the back alleys, of course, but it does give access to businesses, which I think is very important to the Snowmobile Association of our area. There's a lot of people that come from all over the place to come and socialize and meet, and so those accessibility to those things when they get to town is important.
Right, then there's a huge groom trail network all throughout the province that are set up by the Snowmobile Association, where they've got, these are the trails that people take. So as you said, we have many guests from all over the place that are coming for food, fuel, shelter, or hotels and stay overnight and such. So this is a very important bylaw to add towards this. Any other discussion? Mr. Van Beck?
Yes, thank you, Worship. I think it is great for the community that we get this bylaw passed. I would encourage all snowmobile owners that they familiarize themselves with the rules that pertain to this bylaw, such as you cannot cross a highway within the city limits of Weyburn. There are certain areas of the river where you're not able to access. There are fines laid out in this bylaw, minimums and maximums that the police will be able to charge you with. So I do, as I say, I encourage the Snowmobile Club and snowmobilers in general to familiarize themselves with this bylaw so that they know what they can and cannot do.
We'll have, call the question. Any more discussion? Call the question. On to there. All in favor? Carried unanimously. At this point in time, we wish to have, this is your opportunity now to speak. If you would please come forward, Mr. Halbert.
I noticed on the bylaw, everybody that...
First off, just identify yourself and the organization you're with.
I'm Rick Halbert with the Surf Service Snowmobile Club in town. Been working with the police chief and everybody on doing up this map and how to address the snowmobile situation in town. The one thing I noticed on the bylaw is you do permit access on the river, and that's one place that the Snowmobile Club and the Sask Snowmobile Association, we can't monitor that, we can't sign it, we can't groom it. So as a snowmobile club, we're recommending we don't go on the river at all in city limits. So I just want to make that clear that we can't go there.
Could I ask you a question, Rick?
Yeah.
Would you recommend that the city do not allow city?
That's the recommendation I'm getting from Chris Brewer, who's the president of the Sask Snowmobile Association. I went down the river a couple of years ago just to kind of have a look at it, and there's just so many hazards on there, it's just about impossible to market, and conditions change so frequently on the river. You get a hot day, and the salt from the streets starts melting and running out on the river, so there's thin ice possibilities and all kinds of issues along those lines.
So would you help the city then if it was so moved that we didn't allow snowmobiling on the river? Would you help the city with instructing us how to post it and what's that's proper, and so that
Yeah, the Snowmobile Club can talk with the city on how we could approach that, but there's nothing like insurance-wise, we can't do anything outside of the trails on the provincial snowmobile map, so it really limits us to us posting anything. But we can work with the city on that. But I do think we should take that out of the bylaw.
Mr. Bailey?
So what you're reading in the bylaw on that map then proposing is to delete it, that portion from the snowmobile trail, as call it that, Rick?
Yeah, I think you're right there. Maybe you just have it that snowmobiling on the city or on the river within the city limits is unlawful. Where we do have to cross on Highway 39 would be just on the east side of the Co-op truck stop. So I don't know if that's right in city limits. I believe it might be.
No, it isn't.
So it's not just on the east side of the truck stop. So between Queen Street and the truck stop. Right in that area is where we'd have to cross.
Between Queen Street and the truck stop, that would still be in city limits.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be.
That's about the only safe place that the police chief and I could find to cross the highway.
So we'd have to make sure that we say from no snowmobiling within the city limits from Queen Street to the east side of city limits, to make sure that
Your Worship, if I could, and I'd look at the city clerk here for a little bit of guidance, but it does lay out in here more so where it is lawful to operate a snowmobile. right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we want to stay with. Now, it does say it shall be lawful to operate a snowmobile on the Souris River within the corporate limits. That's easily removed,
Yeah.
I think. Then it says, from the east city limit, and it goes on and on. Rick, I don't know that it definitively defines that crossing, though, that you're talking about. And I think we would want to do that. Rather than to try to say, here's all the things you cannot do, I think what we want to do with the bylaw is very clearly say, here's where you can go.
Yeah, so we'd be crossing 13 Highway out by the new 7-Eleven, just on the east ditch of the RM Road.
Yeah.
And then we'd be crossing Highway 35 south of Kevin Ason's farmyard. And then we'd be crossing Highway 13 again, right at the railway tracks out by the co-op truck stop. And then crossing Highway 39 just on the west side of Queen Street, a little ways. And then crossing Highway 35 again on the south side of the Landfill Road.
Mr. Hardy?
Thank you, Your Worship. I would suggest then to council, given these recommendations, and if council sort of exceeds, then what we can do is we can amend the bylaw to eliminate the reference to the Souris piece and put in the allowable crossing areas in discussion with the city, with the chief, and with the Snowmobile Club.
So then at this point in time, we'll just table?
Just table it until, just a motion to table until next meeting. And we'll make those adjustments.
Okay, does it look like it'll probably go forward? Because we do have to get the map into the Sask Snowmobile Association as soon as possible.
I would think we were in a position to get that into them as quickly as possible.
Okay.
Just arrange to confirm that in the next couple of days, and then we'll have it, council give the official seal on the 11th of December.
That'd be awesome.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Do you have a motion to table this motion?
I'll make a motion to table that
I'll second that motion. Until December 11th?
till the next council meeting, which is December 11th, yes.
The second? All in favor? Carried unanimously. Could you get Mr. Chessel? We then, no business. Moving on to new business, we have the bi-weekly refuge collection.
Yes, sir, Your Worship. I keep trying to hit it and never comes on. Okay, Your Worship, with respect to the report in front of council, staff have gone back and have taken a look and provided for council a report that identifies a methodology of by which we will have biweekly refuse collection in the city starting in the new year till about March 30th. And then weekly collection will commence from April 3rd until November 16th. There's two changes in particular that this recommendation will do. Each area as it currently exists will be allocated one day. So there won't be any type of rotation. If you're in area 2, your pickup day is going to be Friday, and only if that is a public holiday would you have the next business day would there be collection. So we're moving to a fixed schedule for forever, and then biweekly collection between the end of November and the end of March.
Your Worship, I'd like to make a motion that refuse pickup be moved to bi-weekly pickup for the winter months and fixed weekly collection be implemented as per the report of the Work Superintendent of Public Works and Parks effective January 1st, 2018.
I'll second that, Your Worship.
Discussion? Mr. Richard?
Thanks, Your Worship. I just want to, for my own clarification, City Manager Hardy, just to make sure I read this right, because oftentimes I don't. If your pickup day falls on a statutory holiday, your pickup day will become the next day.
The next business day.
The next business day, but it won't stay there. It'll go back then to your regular day.
That's correct.
Then that's awesome. Thank you.
The other point is that there's maybe some question that whether if you're a larger family and you have to have more than one, you feel that a bi-weekly pickup is not going to be sufficient, there's discussion that we're looking at different options to be able to assess to. Mr. Hardy?
Yeah, through you, Your Worship, if there were such situations did occur, we would want the individual to be in contact with us so that we could do a little bit of problem solving with them, because there's some different pieces that might be compounding the issue. But at the end of the day, what we expect for the majority of residents is that with our recycling program now in place, and with the kind of numbers that we're getting of what is being diverted as a result of the recycling program, that this for most residents should be not a big issue, and we will take into we will monitor the situation. And as an example, we'll also be working with people like our recycling provider, even in terms of making sure that there might be some extra bins available for recycling after the holiday period, if anybody's worrying. Those are types of things where, it's a one-off situation, but we feel that in terms of being able to provide good service and respond to the positive change in the increase in our recycling, that this will be a most effective program for the city.
Mr. Van Bitcher?
I just have one question, City Manager Hardy, is will the refuge and recycling pickup days be the same then for each household? Or will they be on different days? Has that been discussed?
I believe that they are both the same. They're both the same days. And I believe that we've had those discussions with our provider in terms of aligning that.
Thank you.
With no further discussion, call the question. All in favor? Carried unanimously. So we now have bi-weekly starting at which date?
Your Worship, it will start after the, the schedule will take place in the first week of January. From what I see, then, and there'll be collection the first week of January, and then the third week of January. So there is a calendar that will go out that will be distributed, printed and distributed to everybody through their utility bills. It will be available on the website. We'll make sure that it's available at the front counter, and everybody will get that information in time to plan their holiday garbage and recycling.
Mr. Richard?
Thanks, Your Worship. City Manager, just to be clear, I think that there will be some folks where the recycling day and the refuge day will line up, and there will be some areas where they won't. So I think our recycling provider will also be distributing a calendar for that, correct? Just so that folks aren't expecting that they should be putting both bins out on the same day, because I think there will be some that will line up,
There'll be some that will line
but
up,
some won't line up.
You're correct.
Right.
That's correct.
So just want to make sure folks have a look at both calendars, so they're not thinking they put both bins out always.
Yeah, we're only talking about the refuse calendar at this point,
Correct.
and the provider will provide their calendar. That's correct.
Thanks.
Very good. Our next order of business, home occupation, aesthetics, and beauty.
Your Worship, application has been received to permit a home-based occupation, an aesthetics and beauty occupation at 35 9th Street Northeast, I should say, which is in the original Townsite subdivision. The business will operate 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Sunday through Saturday, with a minimal anticipated increase of traffic flow, one client at a time. This is a controversial use, as it involves clients being directed to the home throughout the day. The parking in the driveway is available. Staff have reviewed this. Neighborhood notices were mailed out to all neighbors within 75 meters, and there have been no concerns or objections received from the city clerk. in taking a look at the options available to council, the recommendation is that their approval be given to the home occupation at 35 9th Street Northeast, subject to the following conditions: that no other person than the resident of the dwelling unit shall be engaged in the home occupation. No advertisement carrying the address of the dwelling may be placed in any media. The face a home business sign must comply with the city's requirements, that there will be periodic review to ensure compliance, and that the city's business license shall be obtained prior to the operation of the home occupation. The other option the council has is to refuse the application or provide further direction to staff.
Mr. Bishop.
Thanks, Your Worship. I'd like to make a motion that the home occupation of Wanda Oliver at 35 9th Street Northeast, Lot 16, Block 10, Plan M4926, zoned as R2, to operate an aesthetics and beauty business in her home be approved within the conditions presented.
Second?
I'll second that, Your Worship. Go ahead.
I'll second that, Your Worship.
Discussion? No discussion? All in favor? Carried unanimously. Second one, home occupation, sale of crafts and art classes, 103 10th Street.
Your Worship, we have a similar application for 103 10th Street Northeast to operate a sale of crafts and art classes to go at this place. Again, we have provided notice to the residents within 75 meters of the applicant's home. There has been no concerns or objections received. The recommendations of staff are to recommend the similar options, or to recommend the approval subject to the following conditions, they being the 4 conditions that were in the previous one, plus that material deliveries and product pickups should be done between the hours of 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. on weekdays. And again, the off-street parking is provided in the driveway of the residents. And that is being recommended by staff for approval with those conditions.
Your Worship, first off, if I pronounce the name wrong, I'm sorry. I'd like to make the motion that the home occupation of Malaya Bratpool of 103 10th Street Northeast, Lot 10, Block 4, Plan T5162, zoned as R2, to be operated as a crafts, sales, and arts class business in her home be approved with the conditions presented.
Second?
I'll second it, George.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Discussion? Call the question. All in favor? Carried unanimously. Our next order of new business is asset management update.
This is just an update on, we received some correspondence on the federal gas tax fund and their asset management requirements. We need to complete a questionnaire, which actually was just submitted today. In 2018, we need a more comprehensive questionnaire completed. They want us to make progress on developing and implementing an asset management plan by March 31st, 2018. June 30th, 2018, we have to develop and approve a policy and a strategy of how the municipality will approach the asset management and develop an asset register for all asset classes. By 2019, add the current conditions of all the assets that are registered and document the desired condition of the assets. By June 2020, identify the funding gap between the current and desired asset condition for the completed asset classes. And by 2022, report back to council on monitoring and improving the asset management plan going forward. So currently we do have a study that we received, so we can work with that and hopefully come up with grading on all of our assets. Right now we have 3,650 assets recorded in citywide our database, but they don't have ratings on them. So that's the next step.
Mr. Hardy?
Yes, Your Worship. So this is a requirement for provincial and federal funding, not only for the gas tax, but is also something which is being moved more towards by senior levels of government in ensuring that municipalities are maintaining their assets, know how big the gap is. They're making adjustments to levels of service as necessary. So this is something that over the next 5 years, as we move forward on this is something that has become more and more important for municipalities. I've had the opportunity to work on a subcommittee of the gas tax fund here in Saskatchewan as a city representative, and this is basically a methodical means to basically getting on top of our assets, knowing what they are, and starting to do the planning for their eventual replacement, and again, setting priorities in terms of what needs to be done first. So this is something that certainly I'll be following up with as we start talking about 2018 budgets. This is just an information item for council, but this is actually formalizes requirements that we will have to fulfill as a municipality in Saskatchewan, and as a city, obviously, probably more compliance than at a smaller municipality. But this is a path that we're not only just at the point of just taking a register, which we have now, but there are 4 or 5 different steps to basically getting to the point where we really are managing our assets.
Now, the question is that when you describe 3,000 or 3,600 assets there, what are we referring to as assets? Are we talking about hedge trimmers to, what are we talking here for this?
It's like everything, roads, sewer lines.
We're talking
Facilities, equipment,
Facilities.
roads, as well as all of our lineal assets, our underground assets. So this is basically taking stock and planning for the eventual, knowing what the level of service is at, knowing when these need to be replaced, and then actually planning for them in the long term.
I guess the confusion on my part was coming in was, why was that coming under the federal fuel tax?
The federal government basically is, when a number of years ago we moved towards the PSAB standards, which was about assets and asset management, and recognizing that these assets which are we currently have today in terms of our streets and our streets and our buildings and our equipment, these all have a service life, and they all have to be planned for. And so the government is basically using its funding to ensure that we're moving towards making sure that we have a plan to do this. This also points to the fact that you've got to do your planning, and you cannot plan not to replace these assets, because they're being used even today's assets are being used to the extent, to the amount of, there's $2.5 or $2.6 million worth of assets every year that we're putting on our books as being, that's what we've used in terms of our assets. So there's all sorts of, in effect, it's making sure that we are planning for its replacement and not just looking, we're not just on a pay-as-you-go type of situation.
Very good. Does that give clarification for everyone here?
You should just ask that the report be received.
I request that this report be received. Mr. Van Betjen?
I'll make that motion, Your Worship.
I'll second that, Your Worship.
All in favor? Report received. 2018 preliminary draft budget.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is a information report only. This is not the night in which we actually get to start debating on where we are with the budget. This is sort of a status based on our initial assessment of where we are at and what some of the challenges that the city is facing in moving forward with a program This report identifies that in terms of provincial funding over this past year and this year, that there is basically about almost $1.3 million in revenues, which the city is no longer receiving, primarily because of reductions of provincial support to cities. That number is, as per happenstance, is roughly the amount that the current budget, based on as close to a status quo budget as we have put together. That's what we have to fund, and that's generally where we are in terms of going forward for discussion. So in providing this information to council, basically what staff have done is it's provided some summary sheets that just sort of give you a very high level about where we're at with respect to budget. And in particular, the reports that are appended to this report basically provide council with a copy of what is planned for the capital works for the coming year, what's being prepared, what's being identified for facility repair and construction, in terms of technology and communication improvements, and in terms of what large notable incremental increases there are within our operating budget. So this is basically a worksheet that we'll be using going forward into our budget meetings, which we will commence in the December 4th and 18th in terms of 2 budget meetings that we're going to have. And so at this point, I'm just asking that this information be received by council, and that in the meantime, if there are any questions of councillors on these numbers, that they be in contact with myself or with the city finance manager. But this is just a preliminary report for information purposes only.
Do you have a motion to receive?
Your Worship, I'd like to make the motion that council accept the preliminary 2018 budget report as presented and deferred further discussion to the budget meeting scheduled for December 4th, December 18th, sorry.
Second?
I'll second that, Your Worship.
Discussion? I guess it's just a motion to receive, so at that point. Very good. Thank you. Mr. Just.
Your Worship, I also have a motion that in accordance with Section 97 of the Cities Act, 2 special meetings for the purpose of 2018 budget deliberations be held in council chambers at City Hall on the following dates: 5 p.m. on Monday, December 4th, 2017, 5 p.m. on Monday, December 18th, 2017.
Do you have a second?
I'll second that motion, Your Worship.
All in favor? Carried unanimously. With that, we come down to our just one announcement that inquires in announcements. Is there any inquiries and announcements? At that point, that Mr. Van Betje.
Sorry, Your Worship. I would just like to thank Pat Maloney as chair of the Facilities Committee this past year, and for Councillor Mickle, who was chair of the Facility Committee for many years prior to that. Pat Maloney, as a citizen at large, has lent his talents and time to the Facilities Committee for the past 14 years and has been involved in very many projects, and he has decided to move on and give someone else his time. So again, I would like to thank him. He was a very valuable asset to the city. We will miss him. But again, I would, on behalf of council, I would like to thank him for his time.
And thank you, Pat, again, for all the time that you've presented to us through the years in the city. We do appreciate it. Any other announcements? The one that Mr. Van Betje and I both sit on the Police Commission meeting, and we're talking about it, that we have had a signed contract, and at this point in time, we wish to announce that the Board of Police Commissioners has authorized a rank change to Rod Stafford. He no longer will be referred to as inspector, but will be referred to as deputy chief. This is a rank change, not an increase or anything. It is a rank change to make a smooth transition. If there was ever such a time that the chief became incapacitated or leaves, he is now referred to as a deputy chief. He will be stepping into place, and if something were to happen to the chief, he just moves forward. It makes just a whole smooth transaction. It makes a lot smoother process within our working of our police force. We are going to be making an official announcement tomorrow to Board of Police Commissioners, and this is at this time we felt that we should announce this and go ahead on this one. So that is what is happening within our city. There's no notice of motions. There's no committee of whole. As we leave you here tonight, here's some words from Franklin D. Roosevelt that I heard here today. It says, when you reach the end of your rope, tie a knot in it and hang on. So that is what we have to leave you with that thought. By Franklin D. Roosevelt.
Is that any connections, Your Worship, with the upcoming budget?
Yeah, yes. That is in connection with our oncoming budgets. Tie a knot in it and hang on. So that's right. And with that, we close this meeting. Thank you.